Assalamu alaikum, shalom, and everything in between. And welcome to episode 2 of A Muslim and a Jew Walk into a Podcast. We are the everything bagel of podcasts. I'm Wajahat Ali, the Muslim.
And I am Jen Taub, the Jew.
We were so pleasantly surprised that, we were expecting hate mail. Because you and I get so much hate every day. But that first episode dropped. And I would say, 99% of the comments were nice?
Yes.
Lovely? Supportive?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think what I like to believe is that we are in the mainstream in terms of being people who are very touched by and concerned by the ongoing violence in the Middle East, and separately also concerned with what we saw in our own communities and across communities about not being able to have civil conversations. And as a result of that, I think people felt sort of like exhaling that you and I could have these tough conversations. Plus, what I think people love is that we have common ground, like our mutual hatred for chocolate hummus, as well as folks learning they didn't even know. I didn't know that it wasn't Mecca that Muslims originally prayed toward, but it was, the Dome of the Rock, or I know there's another name for it, but I it's what I call it.
For our first host for Muslim and a Jew Walk into a Podcast, we have none other than Mehdi Hasan, author, host, Guardian columnist, founder of the new media network Ziteo News. I've known Mehdi for years. There is indeed, folks, a small cabal of South Asian Muslims in media. We're all in the same WhatsApp group. We have no power, but we have biryani. Mehdi originally crushed it in the UK. He made a name for himself as a commentator, as a debater. He moved here. It's been less than a decade, and very quickly he rose up and became known as, I would say, Jen, maybe agree with me or disagree with me, one of the best debaters and interview hosts on television. He was on MSNBC. Stuff happened. He left, but now he has his own media company. South Asians are such overachievers, so annoying. And his media company is Ziteo. And, I was going to throw out the first question because I know Mehdi, but Jen, you briefly shared with me, yesterday, this heartwarming exchange you had with Mehdi, which I think is very appropriate for this podcast and why this podcast is needed at this moment.
Yeah, and I'm seeing in the chat that, hey, Mehdi, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Amazing. Live TV. So
Thank
good.
you for having me. I'm a Luddite, so it takes time to get into technology.
Yes, and you're a Brit, so you also talk with a gorgeous accent. We love that. So
thank you very much.
So
good to be here with you both. I forgot that you both launched this brilliant new podcast. Thanks for having me.
It's incredible to have you as our first guest. We were just kibitzing on the first show, so now here we are with so welcome, Waj. You were gonna, he's setting something up here, Mehdi. So don't mind him. Spin it out for us, Waj.
So yeah, I gave you a glowing introduction. It pained me, but I did. Don't get too big of an ego. But I was going to throw out the first question because I shared with people that we know each other. We've known each other for 10 years. I first met you in the UK. But Jen, actually, yesterday I assumed when we were talking that Jen didn't know you. And Jen told me very briefly about this really lovely exchange you both had during this very tumultuous time. I say this tumultuous time in the past 8 months with the war in Gaza. It has frayed many communities, Arabs and Muslims, Arabs and Jews. But, I was hoping Jen could lead in and share with our audience the relationship she has with you and the conversation she had.
Yeah, and I know Mehdi because he's been so gracious to have invited me over the years onto his MSNBC shows when he still had them. Um, and I think there's two different things. I'm going to talk about the first one now, and we can tackle the second one later because that was more of a conflict, and it was actually really good. So what happened is after Mehdi was apparently canceled from or actually canceled from MSNBC, I sent him a little note in Twitter DM and said I was sorry, and that was a hard moment because at the time I think both of us were posting very different things about October 7th. And yeah, I think we talked in the last show because I think I was very traumatized and triggered, and my initial reaction is kind of different than to the whole thing, different than it was now. And he responded, thank you, and I know that we don't agree on this topic on Israel Palestine, but I'm glad that we can still connect. And I said back to him, I think we agree on more things than you think. And I'll be very candid. And we talked about this, I think, on the show, maybe Mary Trump's show on Tuesday. I think I said back to him, I support a two-state solution, but in a perfect world, there would be one state, but we are not in that world. And I still consider myself a Zionist. And I don't know if we'll ever be in that world. So, and, I thought that was a really nice exchange.
I remember. And I'll tell you what, Jen, after October 7th, I think a lot of people lost a lot of friends. Both for good reasons and bad. I'll tell you what, I'm no longer friends with certain people out of choice because I do believe October 7th was a masks off moment. And I've seen a lot of people say and do stuff. I'm like, wow, that's what they believe. That's their valuation of human life. That's what they think of Palestinians, etc. And then there's on the other side, people who have reached out to me and ended our relationships on the basis that they think I'm an anti-Semite now, simply because I oppose Israel's war on Gaza and because I'm an outspoken critic of Zionism. So it's been an interesting time, a hard time for a lot of people's relationships. And look, I'm someone who says I will disagree with you loudly, I will disagree with you publicly, I will disagree with you substantively, but I try and keep relations with people who I believe are acting in good faith. If you're acting in good faith, let's have that relationship. Let's have a disagreement. Let's do it in good faith. Let's do it without kind of agendas or accusations or all the other things.
Thank you so much because there's this thing, and I don't know if it's the power of discernment, but I exist, even though it seems like I exist mostly in my head, I actually live right in my heart and in my soul, and I feel that energy from you. And I do know that we very much disagree, maybe, for sure, maybe on Zionism, but I want to have those conversations because the world isn't going to change one way or another just because of our opinions. And there is a crisis right now, and I will call it war crimes. You will call it genocide. I don't think it really matters. I know you've written a book about how to win every argument. And, there is that old book, Getting to Yes, about interest-based bargaining and not position-based bargaining. And that is where I live in the world. Anyhow, I just want to hand it back to Waj, but thank you for that, Waj.
No, not at all. And nice old school reference to law school, Getting to Yes, all of us who took negotiations.
By the way, Waj, we didn't meet in the UK. We met in Spain on a farm on a hilltop at a secret Muslim cabal retreat, if you remember.
Oh, yeah. And then
you in the
looked at me
line and you said, I'm Wajahat Ali. And I said, oh, you don't look like your Guardian profile picture. And you said, because I've lost weight. And we were off to an awkward but auspicious friendship start.
I think it's because
we will be talking about food issues later in the show. I promise you, Mehdi.
I think it's because you looked at me with a quizzical look and said, you were much larger.
I did not say that, Waj. That is you spicing up the story.
I think you fat shamed me.
I did give you a quizzical look, and you didn't look like your Guardian profile picture at the time. But
I had lost 25 pounds at that time. I have since gained back 15. But
I'm not saying a word about your weight.
Mehdi, the last several months and what's been happening right now, as you said, it's been a line in the sand moment for several people. We've lost friends. People are like, I'm not going to associate with that group, that association, that leader. And with that, just a few days ago, a red line was crossed. Biden's alleged red line in Rafah. In southern Gaza, IDF did a bomb, which they admitted, strike, killed 2 Hamas leaders, tent caught fire, 35 people were killed, civilians. We saw the horrific images, burnt bodies, burnt to a crisp. It took the death total to about 36,000, most likely going to be higher, 80,000 injured. And you wrote this on Twitter or X, whatever that stupid name is.
Okay.
And I want to quote you. On May 26th, upon witnessing that carnage in Rafah, you said, quote, "If you are still supporting this stuff after all this time, after all the deaths, after all the ICJ and ICC interventions, then you are a bad person. There's no other way to describe you," end quote. What is it about Rafah, this particular moment, that compelled you to write that? And do you still believe that? Was that said in the heat of the moment? Or
Oh,
was that a line that was crossed for you? That said, I just
so
can't go on.
yeah, I mean, let's not use phrases like lines crossed, given how Biden has completely devalued the idea of any kind of lines being crossed. I was at a wedding on Sunday night, family wedding, surrounded by dozens and dozens of people having a good time. And because I'm addicted to Twitter, Waj, as you know,
Yes.
I switched on my phone and ignored all the people around me and went on Twitter and was greeted by these horrific images. And yeah, I was fucked off, to be honest. I was furious. I was upset. It's the dissonance between where I was and what I was witnessing around me and what I was seeing on my phone, and horrific. I mean, and by the way, I'm not one of these people who's been looking at images nonstop since October 7th. You know, friends of mine, family members, staying up late on Instagram, waking up early and checking in on Motaz or Bisan and watching all the images of dead babies being pulled from. I'm not one of the people. I couldn't bring myself to watch that stuff. So
Yeah,
I'm not one of those
me neither. Can't do
brown people who've been doing that. But on this occasion, I did look at the raw footage online, and you know, seeing an actual decapitated baby, not one of the 40 imaginary ones that Israel used to go to war. That was just infuriating. And actually, you know, you asked me a few days later, I was super polite on Sunday night. I said, "You're a bad person." What I really meant to say is, you're an effing sociopath if you still support this stuff. And that's where it comes down to, where I can't sugarcoat this stuff anymore. One of the great moments of, you know, I miss MSNBC. I had a great run there, but one of the reasons I left was because I did want to be free to say what I have to say. And yeah, I can't sugarcoat this stuff. I can't play diplomat on this stuff anymore. It's one of the great moral crimes of our lifetime. It is Rwanda. It is Gaza. It is in that vein. And for me, if you're still, you know, I said this to Piers Morgan when I was on his show a few weeks ago. You know, if the week, and Jen said this very eloquently a moment ago, people were traumatized. They were horrified by what happened on October 7th, which were war crimes. Innocent people were killed. Children were killed by Hamas and other militant groups. But if you, in October, you were saying you backed this stuff because Hamas, and if in November you said this stuff, okay, I don't agree with you, but there's some sense of understanding. I'm sorry, we are 8 months later, but Hamas does not work anymore. We killed 2 Hamas guys, so that justifies killing 30, 40, 50, who knows how many people. It just doesn't work anymore. We're way too far away, I'm sorry to say, from the initial whatever it was, desire for vengeance, desire to get the hostages back. Anyone who pretends that this is about hostages anymore, it needs their head examined. The hostages' families themselves say Benjamin Netanyahu is not interested in getting their family members back. So I think, no, yes, I tweeted in the heat of the moment, but no, I have no regrets. In fact, I should have said something stronger. You're not just a bad person. You need to really question your own sense of ethics, if you have any. If you're sitting around justified. Graham Woodward, someone you and I know very well, who's been writing about terrorism, extremism for years now.
The Atlantic
writer, self-appointed expert on Islamic extremism, quote unquote. He wrote a piece for The Atlantic in which he referred to legally killing children. I mean, if you found a point in your life or your journalistic career where you're penning sentences about the legal killing of children, you really should re-examine your life choices, your career choices, and your basic morals.
So thank you for that. I mean, I think my friend Mirza Baradaran, you must know Mirza's work from, she writes about banking. Do you know, are you familiar, either of you? She wrote,
Jen, we're nerds, but we're not.
Well,
like,
she mostly does financial
I
market.
mean, financial nerds is a whole other class.
Anyhow, she did this great reels the other day, and I thought it, you know, kind of gets at, when you mentioned children, Mehdi, it kind of gets at that. I want to build on that and then ask you a question. Her family emigrated from Iran to America when she was a small child in the 70s, and I think her religion, not that I was talking about people's religion, I feel like she went to BYU and maybe she was raised in a Mormon family. I'm not exactly sure. But at any rate, she said, you know, yesterday on Reels, there are basically in this world 2 religions. Those who believe that everybody's children, everybody's babies matter, no matter if they're brown skin or any other color, skin, pink, what you name it, that children, babies matter, and that your heart aches when a mother loses her child or a child loses their mother. And then there are others. The other religion are people who disregard that, who make excuses for it, who believe, who support, ongoing war machines, et cetera, et cetera. I'm kind of not saying it right. And I feel that we are in this phase where a little bit of brainwashing is happening, I would say, among some aspects of the Jewish community. And I don't want to speak for the Muslim community. Maybe you can address this, where it almost seems like Bibi Netanyahu and Sinwar, whose name I don't know his first name.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That they need to what?
Yeah,
Sinwar.
Thank you. That Sinwar and Netanyahu should just get a room, because at this point their entire worlds depend upon each other, and it's not just them. It's the systems that keep supporting this ongoing war and this extremism and this hatred. And I think what I have seen is folks ignoring, and I'll speak on sort of the Jewish side of things, that sometimes, in our concern for losing Israel as a state, decide to, even if we hate Netanyahu, decide to overlook and not talk about the settlements, decide to ignore Ben Gvir and how is he still a leader. We can point to, as a progressive Jew, I can point to the giant protests in the street against Netanyahu before the war and now. But the reality is, it's not just Netanyahu, right? We've been having these struggles for years and years and years. So that's one thing I want to say. The second thing I want to address is, I think you and I probably agree on so much, maybe except for this possibility of two states being able to exist. And maybe we have a very different definition of what Zionism is. So I want to read you to get this question. Oh, sorry. And the big thing, and that I think we maybe agree with, but maybe have a different angle on, is I 100% agree that anti-Zionism does not equal anti-Semitism. But my however goes is this, that I think there's a Venn diagram. There are some people who are anti-Zionists who are also anti-Semites, and there are some anti-Semites who aren't anti-Zionists. And the question is, how big is that crossover?
Yeah,
right.
fair question.
Okay, and so let me read this one thing, and then I will stop. I'm Amos Oz, as everyone probably in this call knows, now deceased, a writer and peace activist. This is something he wrote in 1994, 30 years ago, that could be said today. So I think something different has to be said. He said, as a storyteller, I find I can live perhaps more easily than others with the existence and validity of two mutually exclusive narratives concerning the causes and the consequences of this tragedy. In my view, however, it's not necessary for Israelis and Palestinians to reconcile the contradictory versions of their past histories in order for them to live peacefully side by side in the future. Last piece, a dispute over real estate cannot be resolved through a compromise which may leave no one happy, but enables everyone to stop killing and being killed. I'm not an Israeli, you're not a Palestinian, but I'm a Jew and you're a Muslim. Speak to me you can pick any piece of this out, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
So I just want to pick on the main thing which you raised about Netanyahu and Sinwar in a room, and probably where we disagree more than states. I'm less interested in states 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't really care. I'm more interested in power dynamics and about where responsibility lies. And I think the reality is that Hamas is a symptom of this conflict, right? You can get rid of Hamas tomorrow and another group will turn up, another group of people will turn up, because they are a symptom of occupation. Occupation is the underlying cause. So when Hamas says, for example, a Hamas official recently said, oh, we're willing to accept, 2 states on 1967 grounds and a 10-year truce, and I shared that, and people said to me, you're so naive. Do you think Hamas would do that? No, I don't care whether Hamas do it or not, but test it out. And the occupation, if they still exist, then trust me, I'll be the first person condemning Hamas. I won't be defending Hamas. I won't be defending any Palestinian resistance. If the occupation's over, right? As long as there's an occupation, then you have to understand that people are going to resist that occupation. And that's going to be the starting point of all discussions. And as for Netanyahu, look, again, Netanyahu could be run over by a bus tomorrow. The next prime minister is Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz is a man who came to office a few years ago, ran for office, ran for parliament, running a series of ads saying, I'm the guy who sent Gaza back to the Stone Age. His words, not my aid. He said, back to the Stone Age. And he ran a video of rubble because he was the chief of staff during earlier Gaza campaigns that Israel launched in 2012 and 2014 and all those other ones. So the reality is that when you have a political leadership and a political establishment across the board, which is now basically, with the exception of a handful of people, small people on the far left or anti-Zionist groups or Palestinian citizens of Israel, when they're all on board with the, not with the details of each strike. Obviously, I'm sure many Israelis are not happy with killing civilians. I'm talking about the big picture of being in charge of millions of people who don't have freedom. That is the fundamental core of this conflict, right? So we could talk about real estate disputes. We could talk about sharing of land. We could talk about all of that stuff. Netanyahu, we don't like Netanyahu. Clearly, he's worse than other people. Hamas have clearly covered out crimes. But fundamentally, you have to keep returning to first principles. This is a conflict. This is an issue, a crisis about freedom and self-determination and an end to occupation and apartheid. You have to deal with those root causes. Everything else is noise. And that's where I stand until we address that point. And when we get to the point about freedom, this is not two equal sides. These are not two states at war. This is an occupier and an occupied. This is a colonizer and a colonized. This is a nuclear armed nation and a bunch of, people with not nuclear weapons. So I think that for me is probably where I put my focus, where a lot of progressive Jewish friends of mine, a lot of liberal Zionist friends of mine will recoil, because ultimately this isn't about, can we get two sides to the table and strike a deal? This is about, no, one side. This is about Israel. Right? Israel is the occupier here. Israel is the government right now, the country that controls millions of people under a military occupation, a military dictatorship in the West Bank, and a siege in Gaza. So for me, that's where all roads lead back to. I mean, we can have long and boring or interesting debates about two states, one state, three states, but
can I ask one more question, Waj? I'm so sorry. So
whenever I said no, Jen, no.
I just want to be polite because I think we're really getting to something. So are you saying, because I think I heard you say this, that you said, well, hey, it seems like it's going to be hard. It probably won't work, but let's try it out. Are you saying, because I think the line that I am told all the time is, sure, it looks like an occupation, etc., but, they just want to kill us. Now, of course, that's a lot of projection. I get that, right? Is it possible, that things would, do you believe that it's just gaslighting, or do you actually believe that, because I often hear from my Israeli friends, only if, if the Palestinian Authority or whoever is in charge at any given time, if they would recognize Israel's right to exist and give up the right of return, everything would be fine and they can have their own state. Those are two different pieces of things. I'm going to stop. Stop with this, but this is a really important point.
For me, Israelis don't get to decide what Palestinians sign up to. Really, the whole peace process has been a distraction, quote unquote, peace process, because again, it started from the premise and Arafat went along with it and Mahmoud Abbas continues to go, which is like, it's two sides sitting across a table. No, it's not, right? It's Israel has to end the occupation. There's no, international law doesn't come with caveats. It is end the occupation. It is give people freedom. It is end apartheid. This idea that Palestinians need to jump through some hoops first before the Israelis deign to give these brown folks their freedom back is not just offensive, but just completely ahistorical.
What does that look like, though? I lied about it. And when you say end the occupation, do you mean just saying, saying everybody live wherever you want? Essentially.
Well, then you're getting into kind of what do I think a vision of
no, but I don't know what you mean by end the occupation. What does that physically look like?
Physically, it looks like Israel pulls all its soldiers and forces and settlers out of the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, allows Palestinians freedom of movement, allows them to choose their own government. And if they don't want to do that, then it means there's an alternative, which is Israel says, okay, everyone in this patch of land, all whatever 9 million of us, will have free and fair elections and choose a new secular binational state. Now, that is obviously, for many people, a pipe dream, too far away, not recognizable. But for a lot of us, and this is why I'm not Palestinian, so I don't try and advocate for things. I don't say it should be this, it should be that. But as an analyst, I don't see how a two-state solution comes about. I think that the window is closed, and therefore I think Israel has now boxed itself into a corner where, with the world now recognizing Israeli apartheid, it's going to be a South African solution where it's one person, one vote, equal rights for everyone. And as an American, I don't have a problem with that because that's what the United States is built on. It's not built on segregation and separation. It's built on one person, one vote. It's not an ethno-majority state. It's not an ethnocracy. Although the Trump people are very upset with the declining white population. That's what's driving MAGA here in America, the idea of demographic change. It's what's driving a lot of the Netanyahu movement in Israel, population transfer, the demographic time bomb of Palestinian babies. As I say, I'm not advocating for a certain solution. I think personally, I don't see a two-state solution coming back. I think a one-state solution is probably going to be more likely when time comes, although I don't think that's anytime soon. But again, it goes back to how do you view the conflict? How do you view the crisis? How do you view this issue? And I view it through the lens of an occupied people, a colonized people seeking freedom. And in other historical circumstances, we didn't insist they jump through hoops. In Ukraine, for example, let's take Ukraine as a good example. Vladimir Putin says X, Y, Z. Ukraine must first say that we will be neutral forever. Now, personally, I think Ukraine probably should offer that. But no Western government is saying, well, okay, hey, Ukraine, Vlad says he won't pull out till you first agree to this. Every Western government says, get out. That's the position of the US and the UK. Russia must withdraw, no preconditions. Why don't we apply that in the Middle East?
I think all of us can agree with the way you can view this, at least is through the lens of humanity, a lens of spirituality. We're all religious here. I'm going to share with people that Mehdi, like me, is a teetotaler. We actually are practicing Muslims who don't drink
to be honest.
or eat pork, and we eat halal. And I know faith plays an important part in Mehdi's life, in my life as well. You're very intentional about what you do. And I think you would agree with me, and I know you do, is that when we see images of murdered Israelis on October 7th, our heart aches because we're human beings. We believe Allah, God, created everyone and that people are masum, innocent. And the one thing that America doesn't do both sides on, Mehdi, is valuing, in my opinion, Palestinian life, brown life, black life. Muslim life. Yeah. I give you the way Nikki Haley views Palestinian life. She writes on a bomb 2 days ago in a West Bank settlement. She's visiting Israel. She signs her name on a bomb and writes, "Finish them." And you would expect that maybe from Nikki Haley. Maybe you'd expect that type of cruelty, the cult of Trump, where they worship and praise a man who is routinely cruel to the weakest. But people don't expect that lack of empathy from Joe Biden. And speaking about Biden,
they do now.
Well, now they do. Well, speaking about Biden, what I can tell you, and I'll share this on behalf of Muslim and Arab communities, but I think it goes beyond that. The great frustration, Jen, and for many of our listeners, for many Democrats within our communities, Muslims and Arabs, was Joe Biden has been able to pivot, learn from his mistakes. He authored the crime bill, which devastated Black communities. He apologized for it. He was the vice president to Barack Obama, a man who's younger than him, a Black man. He has shown trademark empathy. He has gone through so much pain and suffering. When it comes to Palestinians, when it comes to this issue, he just can't bring himself to display that level of empathy. And so now we're 8 months on, Mehdi. Is that criticism of Biden warranted? Is it unfair? Where do you think Biden is after witnessing all of this and the red line being crossed when it comes to him seeing Palestinians as fully human and showing that empathy in his words and also in the policies?
So before I get to Biden, just to engage with one point you said about humanity, for me, fundamentally, it comes down to this. As a Muslim, as a human being, as someone with a moral code, the ends do not justify the means. If I have any moral code in my life, that is it. So I do hear friends of mine on the pro-Palestinian side, Muslim friends of mine, saying, well, it is okay to kill certain Israelis because they're settlers, or it's okay to kill certain people because they're going to be IDF conscripted. You hear this a lot, and no, I don't agree with that. You never kill a person. First of all, you never kill an innocent. Secondly, this idea that you can kill kind of off-duty people no, you don't kill unarmed people. You don't stab them in the back. Like, I have basic moral codes that come from humanity, that come from Islam, that come from international law. So for me, the ends don't justify the means. And therefore, it doesn't matter who is being killed, whether it's an Israeli child, a Palestinian child, an Israeli civilian, a Palestinian civilian, whoever it is, black, white, blue. You cannot justify it by saying, well, they did something bad. Well, then in the other tribe. Well, they're not part of my gang. Well, it saves 100 lives if I kill this one person. Now, I'm the guy who, the train track experiment, I would just lose it because I can't pick who do you kill, the one child or the 100. I can't do the utilitarian stuff. You cannot kill innocents for me. It's my red line, to go back to Joe Biden. There is never any justification for intentionally killing innocent people. So to come back to your point about Biden, no, I don't think it's unfair to criticize him for his lack of empathy on this. He set himself up as the great empath, the comforter in chief. So as you say, we don't expect empathy from Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a man, we can go into a list of things to prove his lack of empathy. Just one quick story on Trump. People forget this one. Back when he was in Mar-a-Lago, before he was president, he brags about telling a story about an old man who fell and hit his head on the marble and bled, and Trump just looked and walked away. This is Trump's own story, because I was kind of grossed out.
I missed that one.
That's
wow.
Who Donald Trump is. This is a guy who cut off healthcare to his great to the baby of his nephew or niece because they pissed him off. Because
nephew.
Trump probably has more details.
Mary's nephew.
Yeah, it was because he was so annoyed at the family that he cut off healthcare, paying for healthcare for the baby. So this is not a guy we expect any humanity or empathy from. Joe Biden is, right. That's how he set himself up. That's how he ran in 2020, talking about Beau Biden, talking about his wife and daughter who were killed in the car crash, hugging people who suffered during the pandemic. And yet, it's not just me saying this. A former Biden administration official told Mother Jones magazine, in a very long profile of Joe Biden, that there is one group that he doesn't seem to have empathy for, that's not included, and that is Palestinians. And why that is beyond me. Is it to do with the fact that, he spent 40 years in the Senate defending Israel, hanging out with Golda Meir and Menachem Begin? I don't know what it is. But you mentioned the litany of things he's done, and some which he's apologized for. Somebody on Twitter tweeted recently, the thing about Biden is, give him 20 years, he'll be on the right side of the Palestinian issue. Because he always comes around 20 years later. He came around on crime, came around on South African apartheid, came around on Vietnam, came around on Iraq, gets it wrong every time at the beginning, finally apologizes, gets it right. So maybe in 20 years, he'll say, oh, I wish I'd got Gaza right. But right now, he's gotten it wrong. He hasn't valued Palestinian humanity. And what bothers me is, I live in DC, where realpolitik folks are like, well, what is he supposed to do? You can't expect them to suddenly condition aid. This is how it's done. Fine. Let's say he never changed any policies of the United States government after October 7th. He carried on arming Israel, carries on defending Israel at the UN. You know what he could do at the very minimum? And for him not doing this, I will never forgive him. He puts out a statement on the 100th day after October 7th. Very powerful, eloquent, emotional statement marking the deaths of innocent Israelis on October the 7th. Not one word about the tens of thousands of Palestinians who've been killed at that point already. 100 days in. The White House statement says not a word about Palestine. Wouldn't have cost him any money. Wouldn't have led to a change in US policy. Wouldn't have done anything. It hurt. It just one sentence. It was not in there. How? How is that possible? For
Jen,
me, that is unforgivable, inexcusable, shameful, is the ultimate form of dehumanization, that you mark a conflict 100 days in and just erase tens of thousands of dead women and children.
And Jen, pardon me for this quick follow-up, but I have to follow up on this and yet, with all that, Mehdi, you still tell Muslims and Arabs, when you go talk to them, vote for Joe Biden instead of Trump.
I don't actually, Waj.
Oh, you don't anymore?
No. I don't tell people to vote for Biden. I tell people that Donald Trump is worse, because that is objectively true. But I don't tell people, A, I don't like telling people how to vote anymore. And B, I can't tell people to vote for Joe Biden when they have genuine moral objections to doing so. I certainly am not going to tell an Arab American family in Dearborn, Michigan, who've lost 20, 30, 40 people to US-made bombs that Joe Biden sent to Israel, to vote for Biden. No, that's offensive. I would never do that. And I think the key issue is I want people to understand that the choice in November, whether we like it or not, is a binary choice. One of two men will be president on January 20th, 2025, Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Cornel West will not be president. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., thank God, will not be president on January 20th. So what I try and do...
Bill Stein will not be president.
When I talk to Muslim crowds, Arab American crowds, I just want to remind them of the stakes. I want to remind them of how the system works, because we forget about the Electoral College. We think that third-party candidates can win when they sadly cannot. And I remind them of the reality-based universe that we live in. I wish we lived in a different political system. I wish we didn't have the Electoral College. I wish in a country of 330 million people, we didn't have to choose between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But that is the choice ahead of us. Those are the two people who will be president. And the simple choice is, who do you want to be president next year? Or who is the least likely person you would like to be president? And that's the choice I put before people, because I just want to remind people of what's at stake, what are the odds. And I also want to remind people of who Donald Trump is, because you know what really kills me is this country is a country of amnesiacs, and we've just forgotten Donald Trump's crimes, his sins, and we've rehabilitated Donald Trump. And now I have Muslim Americans telling me we survived Donald Trump, which is the most annoying line that I hear. It triggers me. I go on a rant. I'm about to write a piece about this. We did not survive Donald Trump. 500,000 Americans died from COVID, many of whom shouldn't have died. Tens of thousands of Yemenis died in a genocide that Donald Trump sponsored via Saudi Arabia, just like Joe Biden is sponsoring a genocide.
Mehdi, quick correction, over 1 million Americans died during COVID.
Under Trump's watch, it was 500,000, the death toll when he left office. And I'm saying that many of them at that point could have been saved if he hadn't been telling them to put bleach in their arms and not wear masks. So for me, it's a real frustration when I see, look, I keep telling people, you don't have to like Joe Biden. Nobody's asking you to like Joe Biden, but please don't rehabilitate Donald Trump. In every measure out there, including Palestine, Donald Trump is worse. There's no debate about that. That doesn't mean I'm telling you to vote Joe Biden. I'm just telling you that's an objective fact.
Now, I agree that this is about who will have the levers of power. That's it,
And also, as AOC put it to me at the Zeteo launch, and I do have a media company I'm going to plug called Zeteo, Z-E-T-E-O. Check it out. At the Zeteo,
we already plugged it for you.
And it comes from the Greek word.
Watch, I'm a small businessman now. I have to be shameless.
Tell us what Zeteo comes from. The Greek word for.
It's an ancient Greek word from the Socrates-Plato era, which means to seek out, to inquire, to look for the truth, which I thought would be an appropriate name.
But how could you do that, Mehdi? Don't you hate the Western tradition? I mean, you must hate Greece.
Well, it's funny because lots of people keep asking me about the Greek name, and I'm like, is it because I'm a brown guy? Because I'm pretty sure Axios went with a Greek name and Semaphore with a Greek name, and no one asked them that many questions. But anyway, a rant for another day. What I would say is at the Zeteo launch, AOC was our guest, and I interviewed her on stage, and I asked her the question, and Waj was in the audience, he heard me, and I said, what would you do? Ask this question about Biden and Trump, and she gave a very, very good answer, which was, who would I like to organize under? Who would I like to oppose government under? Who would I like to push my own lefty agenda under? And when you do that, she said, you can't come to any other conclusion than Biden, right? For all his sins and flaws, you can still get shit done if you're a progressive or a leftist, even under Biden. Who will you have protest rights under? And I will say this. Anyone who thinks that the college campus protest brutalizations, which Democrats like Hochul and others were complicit in, they ain't seen nothing yet. The crackdown on protests that's going to happen in January 2025 under Trump presidency, with the Insurrection Act, with the military on the streets, with the National Guard brought in, is going to be like nothing we've seen before in our lifetimes.
Mehdi, Waj wants to pivot to something super light and fun, but I have one last thing, which is if you actually had Joe Biden's ear, what could he do? Because I think there are things, but what are the things he could do that would be better? And I don't mean to get people's votes. I mean better for Israel and Palestine and for the peace process and for the justice process. What could he do that would not result in handing the levers of power to Trump at this time?
It's a big question.
I love big questions.
There's a lot he could do on the domestic front, I hope. I think that they've missed a few windows, especially on kind of Trump accountability. I think one of Joe Biden's biggest domestic mistakes, historians will say, was appointing Merrick Garland as Attorney General. They dropped the ball on multiple trials. It will kill me that we are going into this election with Donald Trump being tried for nothing other than the Stormy Daniels. Hush money payments, not for insurrection, not for Georgia, not for stealing national security documents.
I agree with you on Merrick Garland.
But in terms of the time left, I would say Gaza. And here's why I'll say Gaza. I'll say Gaza for multiple reasons. Why I think it can still happen. If he did what Ronald Reagan did in 1982, which I advocated he do in The Guardian a few weeks ago, which was pick up a phone, ring Benjamin Netanyahu and say, stop this now. And people say, you can't do that. And actually, Ronald Reagan did it to Menachem Begin. And within 20 minutes, Begin stopped the bombing and Sharon was pulled back. Ariel Sharon was defense minister. Reagan actually called it a Holocaust, by the way. He used the H word. And Begin was pissed off, but stopped. If Biden did make that phone call to Netanyahu and said, this ends now. There's no more. Now, tonight. No American support at the UN. no American military support. We will invoke the Leahy Act, which we should have invoked already, which prevents arms sales to American allies that use them for human rights abuses. We will invoke the Foreign Assistance Act, which says you cannot give aid to a country that is military aid to a country that's blocking American humanitarian aid, which Israel has been doing. If he made that call and stopped this right now and got tanks out of Rafah, it would help him in multiple ways. It helps him in the obvious way, Jen, which is in places like Michigan and Georgia, where there are very narrow margins and there are a lot of pissed off Arab American, Muslim American, Black American, young American voters. It might help him there. Not with everyone, because for a lot of people, it's too late. You're Genocide Joe. But for some people who will say, okay, he took action to prevent any more deaths. That's one. Number two, it would actually help him as a fighter, right? The reason why he should pick a fight with Benjamin Netanyahu is not because I'm pro-Palestinian. It's because Benjamin Netanyahu is a villain. Nobody likes Benjamin Netanyahu.
Totally. He's worse than Trump. I mean, he's the same as Trump.
There's no constituency for Netanyahu in America, aside from the House GOP caucus.
Right.
Everyone hates Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yep.
Even Israelis.
So if Joe Biden,
Yes.
Israelis hate Benjamin Netanyahu. So if Joe Biden runs against Benjamin Netanyahu publicly, makes him a foil, that helps Joe Biden. Instead of inviting him to speak in Congress, Chuck
Jesus.
Schumer.
Yeah.
Right? If you run against Biden, you actually help your opponent. He's not going to do it, but I'm just telling you, it would help him because
Yeah.
Joe Biden has only ever gone up in the polls when he's picking fights. He
Totally.
actually does well when he's fighting, when he's picking
So
fights.
go Dark Brandon against Bibi. Love it.
So
Okay,
Dark
watch.
Brandon against Bibi. That's number two. And number three, the same reason. Here's another reason, which a lot of people have pointed out. There's a practical reason to want to end the Gaza. You could be the most pro-Israeli person in the White House, and you should want to end the war in Gaza. Why? Because you should be talking about your drug price policy. You should be talking about unemployment at record lows. You should be talking about your decriminalizing marijuana policy. You should be talking about the fact that violent crime has come down, murders by record levels. You should be actually talking about all the things you can't talk about because wherever you go, people ask you about Benjamin Netanyahu and protesters call you Genocide Joe and get dragged out of an auditorium. So it's actually sucking up oxygen that you should actually be using for domestic politics. He actually has a pretty good domestic record to run on, one that I praise up until October the 6th. So there's three reasons why it's about Gaza. End the war in Gaza, make the phone call to Netanyahu. It's the right thing to do. It wins you back people who are morally outraged with you. It makes you look like a fighter, Dark Brandon, against an easy cartoon villain.
Mhm.
And number three, it allows you to clear your agenda, stop Gaza from taking everything else off the table that you actually want to talk about.
Makes sense.
You know, Jen said that I wanted to pivot to something lighthearted. We have, you know, as the show is evolving, we have different segments, but I think this is important. And so I'll take the prerogative with the power given to me by myself to ask.
You sound like Justice Alito.
yeah. I'm gonna do an Alito power move here.
Why is very Alito?
I'm very Alito-ish. You know, I throw my wife under the bus for everything.
Yes, that's where I was about to go with that.
Anytime I don't want to go to any social event, Mehdi knows that I outsource it to Sarah and blame my wife, Sarah. This is true.
I blame your wife, Sarah, too. It's funny.
Everyone does. But here's the final question for me before we
Islamic flag outside your house.
yeah. Can you imagine? Before we pivot to and end the show with the lighthearted swinging, but it's an important question, and it's a question that was brought up in our wonderful community by Wanderlust World Traveling, and they made a comment and observation during this conversation. Jen's Zionist. Mehdi, you're not Zionist.
It depends how you define Zionism. I just think Israel should exist. Yes.
You know,
okay, fine.
But a majority of Jews in America, in some way, shape, or form, define themselves as Zionists. That's the reality. And we live in America, and nobody's going back. Arabs aren't going back. Muslims aren't going back. Jews aren't going back. And at least for our lifetime, Mehdi and Jen, most realistically, a large part of American Jews are going to associate in some way with Zionism. And as we try to maintain this multiracial, multi-faith coalition moving forward against, I think what we all agree with is the rising right-wing fascism. Question I have for you, Mehdi, and also Jen, is how do we, or do you engage then with progressive Jews, liberal Jews who empathize with you, but also have a commitment to Zionism? Is it possible?
I think it. Well, I'm not going to. Let me answer. I'm not answering for Mehdi, but for myself. Again, I go back to, finding what our interests are, and keeping our eye on the prize of self-determination, freedom, etc., and trying to figure out. Again, It's about, we can't be fractured. We need to be together in the United States. And maybe it's something Dino Badala said that his father said, don't bring that here. In other words, we need to understand what spheres we're in. We have to work together in America with the coalitions that we have. And after October 7th, I felt very betrayed. And there were so many Jews on the left who wouldn't say publicly that they felt like, and it wasn't Palestinian self-determination. It is not the air gliding into across the border. It was the slaughter and rape of young women and the denial of that, and feeling like you had to deny that. Not you, the general public. Again, I realize there's also, I've moved past my feelings of needs for vengeance and feeling of being alienated from the left. I'm hoping, again, that we can say, what are the things we agree on? And we're better together than apart. And I believe, if Jews stay connected, and by the way, there are so many Jews on the left who are exactly where Mehdi is. And my husband, Michael, who I often talk about, he doesn't believe in a Jewish state. He doesn't believe in, because he believes.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. I mean, we argue about this stuff, but he believes in the same thing like America. He doesn't believe in theocracies. And then I point out to him, I don't believe in theocracies, but can't there at least be a Jewish theocracy somewhere? Because there's so many other theocracies. I'm filled with contradictions. I'm like Walt Whitman. Anyway, I want to work with you. I want to work with Mehdi, but I also don't want to lie about something because of my just deep, deep, deep feelings. So I have a lot of stuff going on. Anyway, to you, Mehdi.
No, it's a good question, Raj. I think it's much harder than it was on October 6th, for sure, on both sides, to use the both sides phraseology. I think there's a lot of suspicion, a lot of paranoia, a lot of insecurity, a lot of victimhood. And I think it's not going to be easy. There's no easy answer for this. I think as long as you have this, as long as you have people conflating Judaism with Zionism, it is a problem, because a lot of us do want to be anti-Zionist, but don't want to be anti-Jewish. And I had this argument with Elon Levy and others, the former spokesman, which is, if you are going to make anti-Semites of those of us who have spent our lives fighting against anti-Semitism within the left, within Muslim communities, because we don't sign up to your definition of anti-Semitism that includes anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism, you're going to lose a lot of people. This is a losing argument. Whether you like it or not, the world right now, literally the global populations, are not fans of Zionism, are not fans of what Israel is doing in the name of Zionism. And I think we've got this thorny issue now where I spent my entire life telling fellow Muslims, don't blame Jews for what Israel does. That has been my consistent line for decades. Don't go put a Palestinian protest, don't go put Free Palestine on a synagogue, right? Don't blame Jews, Jewish institutions, Judaism, Jewish diaspora for what Israel does. Since October the 7th, I can't make that argument anymore, because the Israelis are insisting, and many Jewish communities and organizations around the world are insisting, no, we're all the same. And this is a real problem, right? If we're trying to separate out the two, and people within Jewish communities abroad are saying, no, don't. I keep seeing this now. Everyone keeps saying, well, if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Jewish, because 80% of Jews identify as Zionists. Well, that's a problem, because I'm not anti-Jewish, but I'm anti-Zionist. So how do we separate this stuff out? Because one is,
and I know that about you. I mean, I know you're not anti-Semitic. I know that, right? And that's very hard.
People
I get it.
I am. They insist I am today because I defended Faiza Shaheen, who is a Muslim candidate in the UK who's just been suspended from running for election because she liked a video by Jon Stewart suggesting that people go hysterical when you criticize Israel. And now she's being accused of pushing anti-Semitic tropes.
And that's ironic. Jon Stewart, too, being Jewish.
I know. Jon Stewart came out last night and retweeted
and defended her.
This is the most fucked up thing the UK has done since electing Boris Johnson, which I thought was appropriately Jon Stewart-esque thing to say. But look, I really worry about where this debate goes, Waj, to go back to your question, because if we're talking at cross purposes, then it's a real problem. And I know, look, and I know people in our communities also talk about Zionism in a very one-dimensional way. Unfortunately, the Zionism we see now is the Zionism that Israel in 2024 is exercising. And I'm doing a debate next month in June in Toronto with Douglas Murray on whether anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. And one of the things I plan to point out is Jen made the point, depends how you define Zionism. Very good point. Like, there are multiple definitions. Not everybody's Zionism is the same. But the reality of Zionism is what's happening on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank. So we don't have time for highfalutin discussions about whether Herzl meant something or Jabotinsky meant something or Ahad Ham meant something. We have to deal with what Zionism on the ground means for Palestinians today, which is a life of subjugation, occupation, apartheid. That is what the Zionism they experience, right? And that's what matters. So it's a real problem. I think, to go back to and answer your question before we wrap up, is The way I deal with it is to try and not talk in abstractions, is to try and talk in concrete realities.
Good idea.
Right? When people say to me, do you support one state, two states, three states? I support freedom. I support equality. Do you? I don't support a situation in which people are not free and not equal. It's that simple. I support human rights. Do you support the dignity and humanity and the right to freedom and self-determination and movement and safety from harm for Palestinians that you support for everyone else in the world? For me, that's how I bring it down to. You can call yourself a Zionist, you can call yourself whatever you want, you can call yourself a Martian. I don't care, as long as you sign up to the basic principles of equality, humanity, self-dignity that we should all be signing up to.
I think we can all say amen to that, and I appreciate you coming on.
Always
and
good
having
when
this
Muslims and
conversation.
Jews end a discussion with amen.
No, well, we're gonna end with something else, something on the sacrilegious tip. The show, as you know, we're gonna talk about pop culture, politics, the Holy Land, and food. And in the first episode, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about Jen. I learned a lot about Jews. I learned apparently that blueberry bagels are a shanda, a sin. I had no idea that putting fruit in bagels was like Jews unite
No
over
fruit.
this sin.
No fruit.
Yeah, and I was thinking this could be
Well,
my way of
I'm
finally.
basically an honorary Jew because I don't think you should put fruit in bagels or muffins or anything. I think you should just have chocolate chips and everything.
Well, that's why I was trying to Trojan
Not in
horse
bagels.
fruit. I was trying to Trojan horse fruit into Mehdi's diet because Mehdi is notoriously averse to fruit and vegetables.
No, vegetables
and we want him to
fine, Waj. A few vegetables.
we want him to live and not have a heart attack. But there is one thing. Speaking about meat, I was really pleased to learn that Jen does not eat pork, because I know Jews like us in the Holy Book, you're supposed to avoid shellfish and pork, but Muslims are the OGs. We're hardcore on pork. And so we will end on something that I think all three of us will agree on in this segment of Non Sequitur. Kyle, give it to us. Pork. All right, here we go. Muslims don't eat pork, and I want a fatwa from Mehdi and Jen on Jews and Muslims who eat pork. Let me give a cultural example. Muslims don't eat pork. Everyone knows that, right? We like pigs. If you throw pig's blood at us, we don't blow up like vampires. In fact, pigs and Muslims are allies. But when it comes to pork culturally, let me explain it to folks, just to give it, just to let you understand. You could be a Muslim who's having a threesome with two adult stars. And while you're having a threesome with two adult stars, you could be snorting cocaine off a stripper's belly.
But you won't eat
pork. While drinking Jack Daniels. And your friend who doesn't do any of that comes in eating a ham sandwich, and you will stop and say, bro, astaghfirullah, bro. What are you doing? You're eating pork? That's the way it is in Muslim circles. Like, if you're openly eating pork, folks, that's like a sign you're giving to the world that you literally give 0 Fs about your religious identity, right? You could be doing anything else. Like, literally anything else, people will be like, he was young. But if you eat pork, they're like, astaghfirullah, did you see that? That guy was eating pork. It wasn't even turkey bacon. It was bacon. And so when it comes to non sequiturs, when it comes to pork, Mehdi Hasan, as a practicing Muslim, if you see a Muslim eating pork, and that Muslim says that they're a practicing Muslim, be honest now. We promise never to lie to our audience. What does the Muslim in you say when you see a Muslim eating a ham sandwich?
My easy answer to that is, in my 44 years on this planet, I've never seen a Muslim eat pork or a ham sandwich in front of me. I've seen them drink, as you say. A lot of Muslims drink, but don't eat pork, because that pork thing is a step too far. I'm the reverse. I've had these conversations with friends of mine. If you weren't Muslim, what's the first thing you would do that's not allowed as a Muslim? And I always say, look, I'm a meat guy. I'm a foodie. I don't have any interest in alcohol, actually. If I stop being Muslim tomorrow, I would not head for the bar first. I would head for the BLT. As someone who eats a lot of meat, it bothers me that there's one kind of meat I cannot eat, that I see people savoring over, salivating over, and that I can't eat. So if I wasn't Muslim, that is the sin that I would do. It wouldn't be a sin because I wouldn't be Muslim. But right now, for me, I'm a meat guy. So it's all about the dead animals for me. Sorry.
Jen.
Now that there's Impossible Burgers, I can have a cheeseburger, and it's totally fine.
But if you see a Jew eating
I don't like all the hating on Impossible Burgers. I actually quite like Impossible Burgers.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
I love
actually.
them. Oh, it's good.
Jen, if you see Jews eating pork, what is the inner Jew in you say?
So here's the thing. To be Jewish is historical, cultural, genetic, and religious designation. You see, everything's complicated. So, I don't care. I mean, the thing is, I'm also a vegetarian. So, I'm used to people eating animals, and it doesn't bother me. It's do what you do. There's a lot of stuff. I don't keep the Sabbath because I can't stay off my devices. It'd be good if I could. So I'm not judging. I mean, the thing is, you ask, Jews are like multifaceted. I asked 2 rabbis one summer, listen, all these other religions know what happens after death. I'm curious, what do we believe? Because I've never heard about whether we have heaven or does our consciousness continue, or if I die when I'm, 80, does that mean that's how I am? If a baby dies, are they still a baby forever? I need to know the answers, I said, because what kind of thing is this? And they said, well, we don't all agree on that, or we don't. And I'm like, what the hell? So there is not, there's no hell. There might not even be a heaven. You do you. The most important thing in Judaism, I believe, is the golden rule. Hillel said this, and maybe this goes back to what Mehdi said, the sort of do unto others. Don't, treat others how you would like to be treated. All the rest is commentary.
And what we can agree on is that Mehdi would be a terrible Jew because he cannot stop tweeting even during the Sabbath. I appreciate Mehdi, you joining us. Your new network, please shamelessly promote it.
Zeteo, Zeteo, Zeteo.com. We have streaming shows like Mehdi Unfiltered. We have podcasts like We're Not Kidding. We have contributors like Greta Thunberg, Naomi Klein, John Harwood, Bassem Youssef. We've got a great crew. So yeah, check it out. We're on Substack. We're on YouTube. We're all over the place. Do come and support some independent media.
Well, congratulations.
And thank you all for joining us. This was episode 2 of A Muslim and a Jew Walk into a Podcast. I'm Wajahat Ali, the Muslim.
And I'm Jennifer Taub, the Jew.
And we will see you next week, inshallah. Stay healthy, stay safe, and eat those impossible burgers. Take care.